Hello everyone, and welcome back down here to the Gamer's Den with me, your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. I'm happy to bring to you today the next step in the player's guide to the alignments, and that is neutral, also known as true neutral. A reason for that being is that they do not look at law and chaos, good or evil, and find themselves overly persuaded to one side or the other. Now, what this generally means is a lot of your everyday people could probably fall under this category. They are not overwhelmingly good, and they're not overwhelmingly evil in their day-to-day actions. They're not overwhelmingly law-abiding, but neither are they just so loose with everything that they utterly disregard and see no value in any laws. But this does get to be a little bit tricky to define for player characters and different NPCs. It can be hard to fully classify what it is. And in fact, I do think this is one of the trickiest alignments for a player to actively try to run for a character. Most of us tend to fall just a little bit more to one side or the other, somewhere on the spectrum of alignments. Whether it's we lean a little bit more towards good, maybe just a tad more towards that indulging that evil side of things, or favoring a little bit more law and organization, or really desiring a greater degree of freedom and stepping more into the realm of chaos. It can be incredibly difficult to just really step into and embrace that true neutral role. But hopefully this video will help you get a better grasp on what that is. Now, true neutral is one of those things where, like I said, it's hard to define, but you know it when you see it. And one of the best stock examples of a true neutral alignment is just to take a look at any number of wild animals out there. Wolves, for example, are not interested in inflicting a lot of pain so much as it is that they are hungry. They're a predatory creature, but in that they eat meat to survive, and meat comes from other creatures. Well, it means they're going to have to eat other creatures. Is death a good thing? Well, not necessarily, but it's not necessarily bad either. It's just a natural process of life. It's a natural process of nature. It's a fundamental aspect of nature and the nature of the laws of the universe that we live in. Life and death are things that happen. And for the wolf, it was not wolf or wolves. They were not wantonly cruel. They did have to hunt, track down, and corner their prey and ultimately kill it. But there was no higher process of morality behind it. There was no concern with whether this was a lawful thing to do or not. Granted, that's more on the basis of they don't have the frontal lobe capacities for comprehending these kinds of higher thoughts of moral aspects, law, or chaotic aspects of things. Their focus was eating, surviving, moving on with the day, and staying alive another day, another couple of days even, depending on the size of the kill. And that's really the core part of being true neutral, is it's just not being overly persuaded to one side or the other in the broadest sense of the word. But we can get down to better degrees of detail. For example, taking a look at your classic druids from Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder, any number of games. They're focused on upholding fundamental aspects of nature, these fundamental processes of life and death, and these cyclical movements in nature as things are born, grow, die, return. They come from the earth and then they return to the earth. A great example of this actually is the circle of life from The Lion King. It's a fundamentally very neutral way of looking at things, although The animals have a system of governance, and they clearly show that there's some ways for things to get out of whack. But that's where you start stepping into the other neutral alignments, like neutral good and neutral evil. The lions might lean more towards neutral good, but they're part of this larger process in the circle of life. And druids could potentially be more focused on just that fundamental larger process. They will see good and evil as a larger part, or a part of a larger process. Good and evil are both required within the cosmic scales of karmic balance. As same thing for law and chaos. There are some fundamental laws that exist within the universe, but chaos is a part of that. It's how you define different things. Now, if you have too much of one, that throws everything out of balance. So, some druidic sects would be focused on maintaining that balance, actively aligning themselves with whichever side is the underdog. That doesn't mean it's always going to happen, and doing so certainly makes things tricky from a political sense, because if you've been at this for a while, your allies may be a bit wary of your order given the reputation that you've garnered for being willing to switch sides when one side's on the upper hand. Again, like I said, true neutral can be incredibly tricky to maintain, and certain outlooks on it can be fundamentally problematic, but by no means uninteresting. Things can stay plenty interesting when you're a true neutral character. It's just, again, maintaining that is what's hard. That's where things get to be tricky, and why I feel a lot of players stay away from this alignment, and I don't blame them. Not in any way, shape, or form. Another good way to think about true neutral is, take the machines from Terminator. Skynet is the machine that comes to the logical conclusion of wiping out humanity, seeing it as the largest existential threat to itself. That could be considered lawful evil, possibly neutral evil, but the Terminators, the various other machines that it employs, their programming is not fundamentally motivated by concepts of good or evil. They're just going to do what they are programmed to do. Obviously, it's not a good thing for humanity being on the receiving end of that kind of violence from coldly efficient machines, but the machines are not malicious about it. They are not wantonly cruel about it, maybe a bit heartless, but they're not over-the-top grotesque in how they carry about their task. They're more it's just an efficiency of programming. You could argue that maybe they swing a little bit towards lawful neutral there by virtue of the fact that they're beings that have to go by their programming, but then again, it gets tricky to talk about. Probably a better example, now I'm thinking about it, would be Dr. Manhattan from the Watchmen comic book series. Absolutely great if you haven't read it. And the movie's okay. But Dr. Manhattan, the longer he goes on, the less and less human he is, because he's not human anymore. He may have had a human mind once, but he becomes more and more detached, especially considering that, he was already a very intellectual man of science beforehand. He already had a certain level of clinical detachment to him. Although still being human, he had human urges, vices, desires, but those get so far and farther removed from what he once was, as he just keeps coming more into his power and being what he is. He's so fundamentally detached and so incredibly powerful as to be basically godlike in comparison to the rest of humanity and even the other superheroes, that he just is above concepts of good or evil, law or chaos. Such things stop fundamentally applying to him because he's looking at such a larger, broader picture. He fundamentally has to and is inclined to do so just because he's effectively immortal. He's going to be looking at things differently with a certain level of clinical detachment, or at the very least focused on a larger scope of things. And that right there is probably what defines true neutral really well. Either the character is going to be not overly swayed one direction or the other, being unwilling or unable to commit to any higher ideas of good versus evil or law and chaos, or they're so aware of certain fundamental interconnectivity of so many different things, including these other higher concepts, that they see them all as a necessary part of a larger whole. And gosh, I'm not really quite sure where to go on to from here. Neutral is quite a bit about a dispassionate level of balance. How that comes about just depends on where you land specifically on the spectrum, but with lawful neutral, they are focused with the letter of the law. Chaotic neutral, which we'll be talking about next time, is focused more on personal, individual freedom than anything else. And true neutral just falls right in the middle there. They're not overwhelmingly concerned with law, but there's a need for it there on that cosmic scale to balance things out. They're not overwhelmingly concerned about chaos, but it needs to be there as well because nature is fundamentally wild. The universe is fundamentally untamable, is infinite. Good is necessary as well because good tends to help life flourish to a certain extent. But with an overgrowth of life, things need to die. With that fundamental overgrowth, it gets to be such a complex and cyclical process. But again, that just comes around to fundamentally defining true neutral. Circle of processes, circle of life. Everything comes into a cosmic balance. And a fictional setting that really emphasizes that really well is actually the Dragonlance series. What is it? Dragons of Spring Dawning, Dragons of Autumn Twilight. Anyways, the Dragonlance series tends to focus quite a bit on balance. My personal favorite book out of the series was The Legend of Huma. And in it, the knight Huma, as he defeats the dragon goddess Tiamat, also called Toxis. I'm terrible with pronunciations. But he talks about the balance between good and evil. If evils continue allowed to reign too long, well, it just throws everything into a destructive cycle. But the same thing happens if good reigns for too long as well. Everything stagnates. Everything becomes decadent as everybody starts having it too good. And that balance needs to come back and be restored. Evil reigns for a time, then good reigns for a time, but eventually the scales do balance, but eventually they will tip again, and things need to be corrected and rebalanced. And this too is a fundamental part of just different cyclical natures within the cosmic order of the universe that a true neutral character would be focused on if they're concerned with these larger concepts. If they focus on these at all, it's because they need to be kept in balance, kept in check, and everything needs to keep moving, keep rotating with little to no stagnation. The only thing that remains true and at the center is the stand on which the scales are balanced, and that stand is going to be the true neutral character. But that's just my take on the higher concepts and ideas that go into the true neutral alignment. By no means is my interpretation the only interpretation, and there's wiggle room for everything. Because like I said before and have said through so many of the other alignment videos, we're dealing largely with mortal creatures. Mortal creatures that are going to have failings. They may see an instance where they feel that the good option is the best way to go, or the evil option, or the law, or the chaos, or maybe even simply doing nothing. But Regardless, they will make mistakes, but what's important when the character makes mistakes is what they try to do to correct or make up or even just learn from their mistakes. That's what will help to, again, truly define a mortal, fallible being who is trying to adhere to such a tricky, hard to define alignment. And for you DMs out there, you storytellers, just remember to take it easy, judge them lightly, and try to nudge them in the right direction or give them some advice from time to time. And also remember to try to portray your characters, whether they're true neutral or anywhere else on the spectrum of alignments, with just a bit of care, and also make them fallible, let them make mistakes. With that said, I've been your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. And if you've enjoyed today's video, well, hell, why not wander on down there and click the like button? And also comment to let me know if you've been enjoying the content here, what your thoughts are on the true neutral alignment. I'd absolutely love to hear your take and interpretation. Adding more knowledge, different insights is absolutely how we are all going to grow and learn and do better when it comes to role-playing or whatever else we may be attempting to do using these concepts to tell so many different stories. And also, if you didn't like this content, let me know. And if you disagree with me, absolutely, please let me know. I'd love to further the conversation and have a much broader discussion on the whole thing. But once again, I've been your host, Jordan, your master of lore. You guys have yourselves a good night.